The Battle of Midway, a tale of hubris and humility. Dawn breaks over the vast Pacific Ocean on June 4, 1942. The sea is calm, but the air is thick with tension. Japanese Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto stands on the bridge of his flagship, confident that his master plan will deliver the knockout blow to the American naval forces. Little does he know that in just a few hours, his dream of Japanese naval supremacy will literally go up in flames. The story of the Battle of Midway isn't just a tale of ships and planes. It's a story of hubris and humility, of intelligence and chance, and of how a single day changed the course of World War II in the Pacific. But to understand why this battle became such a pivotal moment, we need to step back and look at what brought these two naval powers to this remote atoll in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. 6 months earlier, Japanese planes had devastated Pearl Harbor, leaving the American Pacific Fleet in ruins. The success was intoxicating for the Japanese High Command. Victory after victory followed. Hong Kong, Singapore, the Philippines, all fell to Japanese forces. The Empire of Japan seemed unstoppable, and a sense of invincibility began to take root among its military leaders. But Admiral Yamamoto, the architect of the Pearl Harbor attack, knew better. "I fear all we have done," he reportedly said, "is to awaken a sleeping giant and fill him with a terrible resolve." He knew that America's industrial might and vast resources meant that Japan's only hope for victory was to strike quickly and decisively, forcing the United States to negotiate a peace settlement. This led to the conception of Operation MI, the plan to seize Midway Atoll. But why Midway? This tiny collection of sand and coral hardly seemed worth the commitment of Japan's mighty carrier fleet. The answer lies in its strategic location and Yamamoto's psychological understanding of his opponent. Midway sits roughly halfway between Asia and North America, serving as America's westernmost military outpost. Yamamoto believed that if Japan could capture this vital base, they could extend their defensive perimeter and, more importantly, lure the remaining American carriers into a decisive battle. The plan seemed foolproof. Use Midway as bait, ambush, and destroy the American carriers when they came to defend it, and force the United States to negotiate peace. But what Yamamoto didn't know was that his perfect plan had a fatal flaw. In a small basement in Pearl Harbor, American cryptanalysts had been working tirelessly to break the Japanese naval code, known as JN-25. Led by Commander Joseph Rochefort, these code breakers had achieved what the Japanese believed impossible. They were reading Japan's most secret naval communications. Through their efforts, they discovered that the Japanese were planning a major operation against a location they called AF. But was AF really Midway? To confirm their suspicion, the Americans devised an ingenious trick. They sent a false message, unencrypted, stating that Midway's water purification system had broken down. Within days, Japanese messages mentioned that AF was suffering from water shortages. The trap was set, but not by Japan. Admiral Chester Nimitz, commander of the Pacific Fleet, now had a priceless advantage. He knew where and when the Japanese would strike. But this information alone wasn't enough. The American forces were still outnumbered. Japan was sending 4 fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, against America's 3, Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown. The latter had been badly damaged in the Battle of the Coral Sea and was estimated to need months of repairs. But in a testament to American industrial efficiency and determination, workers at Pearl Harbor performed a miracle. They repaired the Yorktown in just 72 hours, not the months originally estimated. The carrier was patched up and ready to sail, though her repair crews were still aboard, working as she steamed toward her destiny. As May turned to June, both fleets converged on Midway. The Americans positioned their carriers northeast of the atoll, hiding their presence while waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The Japanese, still believing their plan was secret, approached with supreme confidence. The stage was set for one of the most decisive naval battles in history. The morning of June 4th dawned clear and bright. At 4:30 a.m., the first Japanese aircraft began launching from their carriers to strike Midway. They didn't know it yet, but they were flying into a trap that would change the course of the war in the Pacific. The next few hours would witness courage, sacrifice, and twist of fate that would shatter Japan's aura of invincibility forever. The morning sun caught the silver wings of 108 Japanese aircraft as they approached Midway Atoll. Below them, the tiny islands seemed hardly worth the massive force Japan had assembled, but appearances can be deceiving. As the Japanese planes began their attack, they were met with surprisingly fierce resistance. The Americans were ready. The Japanese strike on Midway was devastating, but not decisive. The Japanese flight leader, Lieutenant Joichi Tomonaga, radioed back a critical message that would seal Japan's fate. A second strike on Midway would be necessary. This seemingly routine tactical decision would have strategic consequences that none of the Japanese commanders could have imagined. Meanwhile, American scout planes were desperately searching the vast Pacific for the Japanese carriers. Hours seemed to crawl by with no sightings. Then, at 7:28 a.m., a lone PBY patrol aircraft radioed the words that would change everything. Main body bearing 320 degrees, distance 180 miles. The Japanese carriers had been found. What followed was a series of attacks that seemed, at first, to be American blunders. Torpedo squadrons from the American carriers attacked without fighter escort, flying straight and low as their tactics demanded. The results were catastrophic. Of Torpedo Squadron 8 from the Hornet, only one man survived, Ensign George Gay. He would float in the ocean for hours, becoming an eyewitness to history. But these apparent failures masked an approaching triumph. The Japanese Combat Air Patrol had been drawn down to sea level to massacre the torpedo bombers. Their fighters were low on fuel and ammunition. The Japanese carriers had been forced to delay their strikes on the American fleet, their decks crowded with aircraft being rearmed and refueled. At precisely this moment, at 10:20 a.m., American dive bombers appeared out of the sun at 12,000 feet. Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey, leading Enterprise's air group, had made a crucial decision when his planes were low on fuel. Instead of turning back, he pressed on, following a hunch that led him to the Japanese fleet. The decision would prove historic. The Japanese lookout spotted the American dive bombers too late. Within 6 minutes, 3 Japanese carriers, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, were transformed into floating infernos. The perfectly choreographed dance of rearming and refueling aircraft had turned their flight decks into powder kegs. Bombs struck among the packed aircraft, igniting fuel lines and ammunition stores. The scenes on the Japanese carriers were apocalyptic. On the Akagi, Admiral Nagumo's flagship, the proud symbol of Japanese naval aviation, was reduced to a hell of twisted metal and burning fuel. Captain Taijiro Aoki, the Akagi's air officer, would later write, "The explosions turned the hangar into a sea of fire. Men were burning alive." But the battle wasn't over. One Japanese carrier remained operational, the Hiryu. Her planes would strike back, crippling the Yorktown. The American carrier, so hastily repaired at Pearl Harbor, absorbed punishment that would have sunk a lesser ship. Though she would eventually succumb to her wounds, the Yorktown had played her part in history. The Americans weren't finished either. Late in the afternoon, dive bombers from Enterprise found the Hiryu. Japan's last remaining carrier in the battle joined her sisters as a burning wreck. By nightfall, 4 Japanese carriers, the heart of Japan's naval aviation force, were gone. The human cost was staggering. Over 3,000 Japanese sailors and airmen were lost. Young men who had celebrated victory at Pearl Harbor 6 months earlier now struggled in the burning waters of the Pacific. Among them were some of Japan's most experienced naval aviators, men who could never be replaced. The night of June 4th was marked by chaos and confusion in the Japanese fleet. Admiral Yamamoto, hundreds of miles away on his flagship, received report after report of disaster. His master plan had unraveled in ways he couldn't have imagined. Despite still having powerful surface forces, including the largest battleships in the world, Yamamoto made the difficult decision to retreat. This retreat marked more than just the end of a battle. It was the moment when the myth of Japanese naval invincibility was shattered forever. The strategic implications were enormous. Japan had lost 4 frontline carriers, hundreds of irreplaceable veteran pilots, and perhaps most importantly, the initiative in the Pacific War. The rising sun of June 5th illuminated a transformed Pacific War. In just one day of battle, the strategic balance had shifted irrevocably, but the full impact of Midway would take time to reveal itself, like ripples spreading across the vast ocean. For Japan, the losses went far beyond the 4 carriers and their aircraft. The cream of Japan's naval aviation had gone down with their ships. Over 100 of Japan's most experienced pilots, men who had trained for years and fought from China to Pearl Harbor, were lost. These veterans could not be replaced, not with Japan's limited training program and dwindling resources. The Japanese military leadership tried to hide the extent of the disaster from their people. The official announcement merely stated that the Japanese fleet had engaged the American fleet and inflicted serious damage while suffering some losses. This culture of denial and deception would continue throughout the war, leaving the Japanese people unprepared for the eventual outcome. But in the chambers of Japan's high command, the reality was impossible to ignore. Admiral Yamamoto's aide would later write, "After Midway, we realized that we could not win this war." Yet Japan fought on, driven by a complex mixture of pride, fear, and cultural inability to accept defeat. This decision would lead to 3 more years of increasingly costly warfare. For America, Midway was more than a military victory. It was a psychological turning point. The nation that had reeled from Pearl Harbor had proven it could not only stand up to Japan, but defeat its best forces decisively. The victory provided crucial breathing space for America's industrial might to assert itself. New carriers, planes, and pilots were already in training, while Japan struggled to replace its losses. But perhaps the most important lesson of Midway wasn't about aircraft carriers or aerial combat. It was about the role of intelligence and technology in modern warfare. The codebreakers who had worked tirelessly in their basement office in Pearl Harbor had demonstrated that battles could be won before the first shot was fired. Their success would influence military thinking for generations to come. The battle also shattered some long-held military assumptions. The mighty battleships, which both navies had considered their capital ships before the war, had played no role in the decisive engagement. The carrier-based aircraft had proven themselves the new queens of the seas. This lesson would reshape naval warfare forever. Today, the waters around Midway Atoll are peaceful. The wreckage of the Japanese carriers lies thousands of feet below the surface, silent memorials to the men who died there. In 2019, researchers located and photographed the wreck of the Kaga for the first time, providing new insights into the battle's final moments. But Midway's legacy lives on in less visible ways. The battle demonstrated how technology, intelligence, and individual decision-making could intersect to change history. When Wade McCluskey made his fateful decision to continue searching despite low fuel, when the codebreakers pieced together Japanese intentions from scattered clues, when American industry repaired the Yorktown in days instead of months, these moments show how human factors can shape even the largest historical events. The battle also illustrates the dangers of overconfidence and the importance of adapting to changing circumstances. The Japanese plan was brilliant in its conception, but rigid in its execution. When things began to go wrong, they had no backup plan. The Americans, on the other hand, showed flexibility and resilience, turning apparent disasters into opportunities. For the Japanese military leadership, Midway should have been a wake-up call to reconsider their strategy. Instead, they doubled down on their existing approaches, leading to even greater disasters. This failure to learn from defeat would prove as costly as the military losses themselves. As we look back on Midway from the perspective of the 21st century, its lessons remain relevant. The importance of intelligence, the role of technology, the danger of hubris, and the value of adaptability are as crucial today as they were in 1942. Whether in military affairs, business, or personal life, these principles continue to resonate. The Battle of Midway remains a testament to how quickly fortunes can change in warfare and in life. In just a few minutes on that June morning, the course of World War II shifted. The seemingly invincible Japanese Navy was revealed to be vulnerable, and the sleeping giant of American power was fully awake. For those few remaining veterans who were there, Midway remains more than a historical event. It was a moment when the fate of nations hung in the balance, when individual courage and sacrifice shaped the course of history. Their stories remind us that history is not just about grand strategies and movements of armies. It's about human beings making decisions under pressure, facing fear, showing courage, and sometimes changing the world. Thank you for watching our documentary on the Battle of Midway. If you enjoyed this exploration of this pivotal World War II battle, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more fascinating stories from Japanese history. Your support helps us continue bringing these important historical events to life.